I'm not strong enough to be able to say no to the fast money. It was my public defender who said to me, "You deserve better." Because every day that I get up, I still need to make the decision not to pick up a drug, even 33 years later. The Ku Klux Klan would come through, and I could hear the voices, and I could hear them kind of just galloping through. And the sound that I would hear would be throw. Also in lockup 23 hours because I had an escape on me because I had not shown up for parole or probation or any of that. And then there was a girl in there who actually, while I was actually, who was my roommate, and she actually hung herself right in. I woke up to feet dangling by my bed.
Oh, man.
It was definitely the name of your show. It was a nightmare for sure.
Welcome back, Nightmare Success In and Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Folks, don't forget to follow the show, subscribe, share, like it up, make comments. It all helps the show. I've got a great guest today that I've been really excited to interview. We had a great conversation on the phone. Name's Maggie Young. She's the Chief Recovery Officer for Liberation Programs. And, you know, the great thing about Maggie Young, she's got an incredible story, a transformation story. And I want to give a shout out to Charlie Grady, who actually connected Maggie and me. Charlie has been on the show. He's got an incredible story. He's a movie actor. He just retired from the FBI after 20 plus years, but he's got a great program. Well, he got a couple programs that he works on. One's Hang Time and Her Time, and then he's got the Hall of Change, and that's one of the things that Maggie Young is a part of. And the Hall of Change is one of the things I would like for us to see, that it spreads out all across the nation with Charlie. But it's in Connecticut. They take the 8 counties in Connecticut, and those people who've been identified by an eclectic group of people that choose people who have, through reentry, really created and become something out of the nightmare that they've been in. And Maggie was one of those people, and I think she was the first of the 8. Are you the grade 8, Maggie?
I'm the second cohort.
Second cohort. Okay.
Yes.
And it's a great thing because these people actually not just get recognized, they get in and they talk to people who are becoming new COs in prisons and cadets and police officers and all kinds of different places where they speak to make people know that they're not a number, they're a person, and to get more of a familiar feel to who these people are that have been put through this process. And I love everything about that. And Maggie's got such an incredible story of, one of the things I thought was really interesting is she was in and out of jail and prison for 10, 15 years. It was all related to drugs and being an addict, and that involved stealing and the other things that to support her habit. But I thought it was really interesting because Maggie and I have had a couple of conversations, and all I felt like, because she's very up and with it, and I felt so good after I talked to her. And then I was listening to one of her podcasts where she said that when she was talking to someone in recovery class in prison, she said that she had never been happy. And I thought, wow, that's such a deep comment from somebody who is the chief recovery officer at a place where, at Liberation's program, she was also a client about 33 years ago. And I want to say this is a special day for Maggie because 33 years is her anniversary today, February 6th. And when we were talking on the phone, we were talking about, dates and times. I said, well, what about February 6th? She said, February 6th would be great because that's the 33rd anniversary for recovery. And well, of course, because huge part of the story. I can't wait to jump into all this with Maggie. I first want to recognize our show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. Who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots looking for a car? Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take away all that pain and hassle of getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find the car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge. It's a new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Autoplaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Welcome in, Maggie Young. How are you?
Thank you. I'm well. Happy Thursday, Brent.
Happy Thursday. So, Maggie, first of all, I'm so happy that Charlie was able to connect you and me together. And I absolutely love stories where somebody goes through their own life nightmare and they walk through it and they come out and they use that experience to help other people. And that's what you've been able to do as the chief recovery officer. It's a full circle cycle of where you started to where you are now,
Yeah.
which, and the other great thing about it too, Maggie, is this show goes into 1,100 prisons across the United States. And I always love, these type of stories where people can say, oh, well, Maggie Young's, she's made it. She's made it on the other side, because reentry is really tough. And a lot
Yes.
of people on the inside think, I don't know if I'm ever going to make it work. And it's a great story when people do. But Maggie, I know your story. You were a child that grew up in the 50s, um, and it was in Alabama. And I was curious, in your background story, what would that have been like in the 50s, um, growing up in that world in Alabama, being in a black family? Things were still dicey with everything that was going on. I wonder, like, how does a child deal with that?
So I think the one of the things that is really could describe it really well is that I was taught silence and secrecy. So through it all, the being a child in Alabama during slavery times, my grandfather was a sharecropper, and there was just really. I remember being at the age of 2, living with my mom and my dad, and thinking to myself, who are these people and when do I get to where I'm supposed to fit? Like I
Mm,
just never felt like I quite fit in. And to have that thought at 2, later I realized like that is not a normal thought to be having at the age of 2. And so at the age of 5, my mom left Alabama, moved to Connecticut to do a sleep in job. And she was taking care of 2 white kids while she slept in, and she did that work. And so I and my siblings moved in with my grandmother and my grandfather. And my grandmother and grandfather had 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, theirs and 2 other bedrooms. And so there was myself and my cousins. And so 9 of us stayed in one bedroom, slept in one bed throughout that time.
wow.
And what was really very much scary was the sound of what was happening every night. And so there we were in this hut where we lived in that my grandfather and my uncles had built with a tin roof. One of the things that was really memorable was I loved hearing the rain because I could sleep when it was raining and hidden on the tin. But what I would hear more times than not was the when there would be the Ku Klux Klan would come through, and I could hear the horses, and I could hear them kind of just galloping through, and the sound that I would hear would be throw, throw, and those were the times that they would then throw flames,
Mm.
and I never knew what that meant, and so the way I grew up was that children were to be seen and not heard, so I couldn't ask any questions.
Had to
But
be it had to be incredibly scary though, Maggie, right?
this silence tones in there and the feeling of, so I learned how to be quiet, to be still, and to actually live as though I wasn't breathing. So it was just that whole thing. And so it was always very scary just kind of living there. And my grandparents and the adults in the house would always have these hushed conversations. And I can even feel it right now, just how it was that my heart would palpitate because I never knew when it was going to be our house that the flame was thrown onto.
Well, The other thing about that is, though, I mean, you said that you felt like at an early age that you never fit in and you were surrounded with a lot of family. Was there a reason why you didn't feel like all those people around you that you didn't fit in?
I think it really had to do with the fact, for just in retrospect, it had to do with the fact of kind of there was no real conversations or communication around, and I didn't feel like, so there was, at the time there was always this paper bag kind of comparison, and so complexions, right? And so
Mhm.
everyone in my family were, except for a couple of us, were lighter than everyone else. And so that was what was being used to determine whether a person was actually identified as a house nigger or nigger. And so all of this is really a part of kind of conversations that I'm hearing, but not conversations I'm a part of.
Mm.
So, and I think that for me, that it really was another way of me trying to escape the pain and the fear of what was happening, of not being able. I don't think I wanted to fit in because
Yeah.
it just felt too scary
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
be a part of all of that, and not knowing anything, and then knowing that I can't really ask any questions.
Mm.
And so I lived in Alabama until I was 10 and a half. When I moved to Connecticut in 67, my mom she had come back to get myself and my two younger brothers and brought us to Connecticut. And so the culture shock of that. So my grandfather, I watched my grandfather and everyone who actually was over, like I was too young to work the fields. So I didn't pick cotton. But
Mhm.
my job was to go out, and we would pick up plums, and we would have to feed the animals, and we would, pluck corn, and we would have to feed the chickens. So we worked on the farm, and we did that. And so it was just really just the whole thing around kind of, I really just didn't know. And I went to school for a couple of years because I was too young to actually farm. And so I went to school, and these little classrooms, of, the 10 or 12 of us who actually were in school, all of the classes happened right in that same classroom.
Mhm.
And there was a school that was for coloreds, and there was a school that was for the whites. And our school was the smallest that you could see, and it
So
was just, so everything was really just this separated, segregated whole process of kind of, felt to me like everything felt like this is not where you're supposed to be.
right. And it had to be such a culture shock for you to go from Alabama to Connecticut.
Oh, was it? So I come, so now my mom has always, my grandmother, my mother, we come there are traditions of just sewing, right? Hand sewing. And again, we're very poor, so we're living with what we have. Hand me down clothing. My mom would sew everything, and she would maybe take a shirt and rip that apart and make a skirt that we needed for church and things of that sort. And so I come into Connecticut, and I go into school, and this is my first fight, right? I go into school, and I had not seen a sandbox before. I didn't know anything about that. So I go into school, and I'm wearing my handmade skirt and blouse that I'm wearing. And there are these kids with the lace on their socks and these fancy dresses and fancy things. And I remember this kid said to me, "You're poor."
Mm.
And it didn't faze me because I didn't know what that meant.
Mhm.
So when I went home, I said to mom, I said, "Some kid said that we're poor. What does that mean?" She said, "You're rich in love." And that was the extent of what she said about that. I took that as saying that this kid had said something about me that really should not have been said. So I went back to school, and the next day I had my first fight in the sandbox.
So so you just took that on as, okay, Maggie
Yeah,
was not gonna take that laying down. Yeah.
right, right. And so that was my first fight. And so but it was really difficult because of the fact that everything was different in the classroom. So we were mixed. Blacks and whites were in the classroom together. We were on the playground together. We had recess, and there was, in Alabama, there were they were always very thin books where they were actually written and you could just write your answers right in the books. And we came in, we had these textbook sizes and things of that sort. And it was very difficult for me. Just, I remember feeling the anxiety in my gut every morning when I had to go to school,
Hmm.
because then this kicked it up to another level. Now I really feel like that I'm not fitting in, because now I'm in this whole new place.
And you're acting out and getting into fights. And what is your mom thinking when this is happening? That she's brought the kids up and Maggie's getting into fights at school.
Yeah. And so mom is working two jobs. And so I'm at home. And so when they, at the time, of course, there was no computer. There was not like the phones and all of that stuff. So I had to bring the note home. And so the note never got to mom.
Mm,
And by the time that mom found out that I had had a fight, then I was punished probably for about a month or so.
yeah.
I couldn't go out to play when I came home, because the rule was you get home, you change your clothes, you have your snack, you go out. And before the street lights come on, you need to be in the house. You take your bath and you get ready for bed.
So as you progress through middle school, then high school, did you feel like you fit in more with the new world of where you were at?
Through probably up until at least a junior in high school, I still was kind of watching as
Hmm.
though they were living life, and I was kind of hanging out, seeing how they lived life.
Okay.
And I some of it, through some of the work, I realized that some of that really had to do with I had some sexual trauma at the age of 5, right in the home, right? So my uncle, who felt like an adult to me at the time, who I thought was an adult, I realized about 6 years later, when I had gone to my grandmother's gravesite, that like he was actually 13 when he raped me.
Mm.
And so there I am, starting off where I don't feel like I fit in. And then now at the age of 5, this happens. I really don't fit in, because who is this person? No one is doing anything to help me,
Hmm.
and then so there is all of that stuff. And so now I
And
go
you're not
and,
talking to anybody about that, I'm
well,
assuming,
I can't, because I'm a kid, right? The
right?
rule is,
It's
right?
silence,
That's the
secrecy.
rule. That is
Yeah.
what's been said, and that's what I've learned.
Hmm.
All of it is silence, and somewhere in there must be something I did for this
Hmm.
to happen.
Mm.
Because I even took on some ownership for, when the KKK was riding by the house and the whole bit. Maybe if I'm better, maybe if I do good, my dad would fight my mom. So maybe if I get a better grade in school, or maybe if so, at an early age, I where did I learn that? But
Yeah.
that was how I kind of operated. And so I continued to feel like I didn't fit in that everyone else's life. And so that's where that whole happiness thing comes from, because I was seeing what I thought happy was in other people's life.
You were
But I
seeing
knew
it and not in yours.
and I knew how I felt inside. So that
Hmm.
emptiness inside of me didn't match for me what happiness was.
So was that because I know that when you first got into drinking and that you didn't really like it, because a lot of people say with what you're talking about, Maggie, that it's an escape, to feel like you're part of, or to feel like you're part of the in group. But I didn't get that from your background story. I didn't get that as because the first time I think you were a junior or senior in high school and you had a drink and you didn't like it and you didn't go back to it. So it wasn't that you were drinking to escape or
Right.
the things that, so how did all that work?
And it did. I really, so my dad was a drinker.
Uh-huh.
And so I never knew again. So here I am as this kid in Alabama, right? Now there has been the separation of my mom and dad. So this is another kind of transition that is like, wait, did I do something? What is happening here? Now I'm at my grandparents, right? And there still is nothing, there's no communication, no talking or anything. And the kids, listen, you just know that you have to go to Sunday school, Bible study, church, school, and you don't say anything and you don't ask any questions, right?
Hmm.
With this whole life. But I had watched my dad, where my mom was really introverted. She was doing everything that needed to happen in the whole bit. And my dad would come home, and I never knew whether dad was going to come home and he was going to be happy to see us, and he was going to actually still have some type of a conflict with my mom, right? Whether it was the food was not ready or he didn't like what it was that was cooked or whatever. But he still might be happy and drunk that day.
Mm.
Or whether he was coming in and he was going to fight her as soon as he got in. And I would take these moments and I would hide. We had this kitchen table, and that invisible piece of me feeling like I could actually hide behind the leg of a table was what I would do. I would just go and just try to be there. And when I went back to Alabama as a teenager and saw the size of that table, I was like, wow, that would be impossible for any person to
Right.
hide behind. But
Right.
that was how I was kind of living through that. So, to answer your question around the fitting in and the reason why I drank that I believe that I didn't drink until I tried it because I wanted to make sure I did not end up like dad,
Yeah.
right?
That was your
Because
example.
I associated that drinking with, these two extremes.
Hmm.
And so I didn't want to. So there was that. Then I go to school and I'm thinking again, I'm taking ownership, and I think that I am the one as a kid that I determine what happens in my mom's life. So mom's working two jobs, she's working hard. I got to be good so that nothing bad happens in her life.
Hmm.
I got to make sure she doesn't have to come to the school, because when she was in school it wasn't good.
Hmm.
So I have to make sure that I am actually making sure that she doesn't have to come to the school for any reason. And so I, again, even throughout school, so in middle school, I got a job in the cafeteria and still trying to find a place where it is that I feel like I fit.
Hmm.
And I had friends, associates and things of that sort. Um, but I never quite identified who I was and what I was bringing or what I wanted to bring to a friendship.
Hmm.
So there was that whole piece of it. So my sister Velma, who passed in 2020, was like my best friend. We're all 2 years apart in my family, and then there's my younger brother who's 10 years. There's a 10-year difference there, and so throughout school we moved. When we finally moved from my mother's friend's house to the south end of Stanford, which is really drug infested and the whole bit. But I had some friends who were going to the same school as me and the whole bit. Mom was very clear. You see that person who's standing on the street standing up sleeping, you don't want to be around those type people. You don't want to do that. I could not stop myself after homework looking out the window because I was so interested in how they could possibly do that.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
didn't know there was any connection to that and the drug use at all, but it was just really just doing that. My friends started to hang out in the courtyard. They started to smoke pot. They started to go out for drinks and things of that sort. Not interested. Not interested. And so it was another way, I think, of me kind of, disconnecting myself. That whole, that I'm just not fitting into this whole thing. And there when I did make my decision for college, I think there was some thought in there around the fact that if I move away from the East Coast where mom is, around mom, I can be freer to be different and I don't have to worry about disappointing mom.
Mm. Yeah.
And so I went to school in Atlanta, right? And they were calling it Little New York. So I was like, okay, that would have enough of kind of like the
Sure.
same type of interest and things of that sort. And that was where I drank.
And
There was.
when all this was going on and you went to college, did you do pretty well in school? Because I know you got decent jobs. So
Yeah, so I did pretty. So I thought I was doing better than I was doing,
okay.
right? So, but I did okay. I passed all of my classes. I passed all of my grades. I did that, and then there was like my interest was really in home economics, right? So I loved sewing. I had picked that up from my mom and done that, and so there were the classes that I loved, and it really came from really it depended on who the teacher was, how
Yeah.
well I did in the class, right?
Yeah.
And so I did that, and it was through. my good jobs, I think, were really through knowing people.
Hmm.
So my first job was I was working. My first job was the neighborhood youth corps, which was like a camp, a summer camp. And so there was my brother who actually was one of the dignitaries in town, knew someone who knew someone, and one of his kids was a friend of mine, and so he actually was the one who connected me to that job. I got that job, and I've always been very good with sustainability in jobs, because once you give me an opportunity, I'm going to prove that I could do this job. And so I got that job. I stayed on that job, and then from there, I went from there, and I got a job at a local radio station, and that's where my drug use, like, it was the grounds for. I mean,
Perfect breeding ground
it
for
was
drugs.
was perfect. It
Yeah.
was perfect. I mean, and that was the first time that I really enjoyed going to work, because, I would go to work, and, I would drink with the salesman, and then with the newsman, and we would do cocaine, and then, like, with the program manager, like, we would smoke. And so I I had this relationship with
so
everyone who actually was there.
So, Maggie, it's interesting from a lot of different angles, because here you are as a kid who has a dad that you don't want to be that, and then you've got a mom that you're not wanting to disappoint, and then you go to Atlanta, and it's kind of like, I'm free, and you don't just start drinking, you get into, cocaine, freebasing. What um did you feel like that you were living on the wild side? Did you feel like Maggie's been cut loose, and or did you feel like, oh, this is just something I'm doing for right now, it's not a big deal? How did that all that
Yeah.
factor into your world?
Right. So initially, it really just felt like, because for my first 2 semesters, I was still going out and, hanging out with my roommates and the whole bit. And I was like, I don't, I'm not drinking. I was the only one who was within the group who was not drinking. Right.
Hmm.
And so, we were double dating and going out and things of that sort. I'm not drinking. And I remember sitting at this bar on Deerfield Road in Atlanta, and people had been saying, "Oh, try this." At the time, wine coolers were out, and I was like, didn't like it because of the sweetness. Still didn't like it. Oh, try this. Then this won't you. It won't burn as much. Try this. It won't be as sweet. And I remember this guy came and he said to me, he's like, "Oh, I was just like that." He said, "I didn't like the burn or the taste." He said, and so he said, "Try a martini." And I was like, "Nah, I don't.
Hmm.
I don't want to try that either." He's like, "But it has the salt and it's going to help." And then he was the same one who came and he said to me, he said, "You know what? I think I have the answer for you." He said, "Try a shot."
Okay.
He said, "Because that's what I did. I started to try a shot." He said, "And you get it down really quickly. The burn is quick and the whole bit, and you get the impact of it." I remember taking that shot, and I tell you, Brent, it was not that I missed the burn nor the taste. It was how quickly I felt the warmth in my body, and how at that moment I felt like the wild side could actually express whatever without any concern for anyone.
Mm.
That was the biggest piece, right?
Well, that is a big piece, because up until this time, when you're living your life, you're living with so many secrets and so much silence, and you're not sure. And this, I mean, as you're explaining, I can understand this was a release for you. Um, did you feel, did you ever feel like in that early stages that you could get addicted?
There was never a thought. And so it was the whole thing. So this piece happened, right? And there was like the shots. And so I'm still in school. So I'm still going to classes. So I'm still doing okay. I'm still going home on breaks. So my mom is still seeing me. She's still proud. I'm still, all of that is still happening until
Hmm.
my second year in college. I'm no longer going home on breaks. Now my weekend has started on Thursdays instead of Fridays. It is going through Mondays. I'm missing classes. I'm failing classes. All of that is happening. But I never had the thought, oh, alcohol is a problem here.
Hmm.
And then I was introduced to freebase.
Hmm.
And this same guy, who was a guy who actually was dating my roommate, had said to me, I know you don't really care for the alcohol because, once you kind of take a couple of shots, you're done for the evening or whatever the case may be. He's like, this is something where, you know what, you don't have to worry about the taste. You don't have to worry about like the burn or any of that. Just try this. And I remember sitting in the basement. My roommate was actually dating a famous basketball player who played with the Hawks, and they had this huge pipe with all of these kind of like the hookah type of. It was just, and so I can imagine that I walked in there and my eyes went like,
Yeah.
oh my God. And so that was when I was introduced to it. And I remember being told, okay, here, just try this, right? You're not going to try much. You just try it. And you just take one smooth pull from it and just see what happens. And that one smooth pull was what I chased for
That
the
became your
next.
chase.
That
Because
became my
I
chase.
and I know that, you went on, you moved back, you got a job. I think you were at a department store and some
Yep.
other things, but you actually, to support yourself, began stealing. How did you rationalize what was going on then? Did you know that this was right on the edge, that you could get in trouble for this? Did you what
No,
what was going through your mind?
right. So the thing is that I think what was going through my mind was the fact that because I don't like it,
Hmm.
I'm not going to get addicted. I'm not going to become that person who I saw out of the window
Hmm.
when I was living on the South End, right? I'm not going to become that person. I'm still going to work, right?
Right.
I
You're
graduated from
functioning.
college, right? I graduated from college.
Right.
I have a job. I have a job at so the
You're
when I
rationalizing all this out as being
all the
that you're
way.
functioning, everything's
Exactly.
normal. Okay.
Exactly. Everything is normal. Never once did I have a thought that I would become the person who was actually standing outside in that. And there was never any thought about, oh, this is like addiction. This is
Did the people around you know it?
not at the time.
Yeah.
Not at the time. And if they did, they weren't saying anything.
Right.
So no one was saying anything. So it was for me, it was so different in the sense that it was that, I wasn't around people so that they would kind of who cared enough about me to be able to say, listen, something is changing in you. So we need to kind of look at that, right? Because what I did was I shifted from one of the things that I often say when I tell my story is the fact that, I didn't really have anyone tell me anything about going into a 12-step program, going into treatment or anything. And no one really talked. We didn't talk about, I only talked about being just as impacted when I was impacted.
Mm.
When I was in prison, I talked about it there, right? And I think a lot of times I use that time to say, let me find out if there's anyone else here who has done something that I haven't done, and I'll try that when I get back out.
Mm.
So I was using that for that piece of it, looking at it that way. But there was not anyone where I was that was really saying, oh, we should probably think about, you know, getting better. We should probably think about stopping. If I was with a group of people, we all were on probation and were violating it.
Mm.
We all were actually running from the police and had a
Yeah.
warrant out for us.
Yeah.
We all were right out in the park and were just smoking and really was living underhoused or homeless. This guy who I was living with really just became an opportunity for me to go to at times when I know he was getting paid and he would let me come in and he would give me food and I would go to his job at times and I can imagine I looked a wreck and he would
Yeah.
hand me a sandwich and hand me $20. And it was all of that. And so I made sure I stayed away from as far away from my mom as possible because I knew it would kill her to see what I was doing to my life. But never a thought about, oh, this is addiction. I probably should do something. So it was only through the justice system that, I ended up getting to a place of really being in treatment and then actually getting into recovery.
So, I mean, you went through a long period of time there of going in and out. We talked about it was like 10, 15 years. You had that 3-year stint. Is that where you came to terms with yourself? Is that the time when that happened?
It actually isn't.
No.
It isn't. You know what? I used that time when I was in there for that 3 years because, we were wearing that as a badge of honor.
Hmm.
Did that bid, that's done. Learned while I was there that I could try this and try that because this person told me that they had tried this and tried that.
Hmm.
And so, I did that. And that was the second to the last time that I was inside. And the last time was the fact that I had gotten arrested because of the fact that I was trying to break into a bar with someone else because of the fact that we had ran out of drugs and we decided that it was this bright idea. Yes, let's just go break in the bar and get a cash register.
Hmm.
And so I tried that. So I got arrested for that and I went in. And there is when they offered the alternative. And it was my public defender who said to me, "You deserve better." Because year after year, I would get the same public defender
Yeah.
and I would get a promise to appear, or I would get a plea, or I would get, and I would get something. And I'd gone to liberation for outpatient, intensive outpatient things, and none of it worked. I would show up partial days, or I wouldn't show up at all, and things of that sort. And I remember the public defender saying, "Listen, if you get a plea to go into treatment because you deserve better. You deserve better." And I still went in because of the fact I didn't want to take the long trip from Niantic. I didn't go in because I wanted to recover or get better. That
Yeah.
was not what I was thinking about, because I was clueless as to how I was causing pain, not only to myself, but to my entire family, to
Everybody
my
around you.
community, to everybody around me.
Hmm.
And everybody was worried about me, but I made sure that I used that disconnect of where I had learned so well how to, present as though I don't fit any place, so that people didn't say anything to me. And so I was using that so well that people were not saying anything to me. So I would not be around anyone who cared anything about me, only the people who were actually smoking along with me. And we weren't having conversations about getting better.
Right. You were going for the next high.
That's it.
Well, I want to take a break here because when we come back, I want to go into how your turn happened and how you became who you are now, because I think it's pretty remarkable. Um, I want to recognize a lot of people don't like how they look and show up online. Many individuals think there's no hope when it comes to managing your reputation online or with Google. Well, there is hope. It's called Discoverability Company, and they can help you. Whether you're building a reputation from scratch, repairing your search results from a negative news story, or even you're just trying to position yourself a little bit better against business competition, Discoverability can also help you how you're portrayed on popular AI services like ChatGPT. To learn more, visit discoverability.co. They're even launching a do it yourself SEO option, a course for individuals who want to take on their search results on their own budget and speed. Listeners of Nightmare Success can take $100 off the DIY SEO course with the coupon code Nightmare Success. Check them out. Drew Chapin is the head of Discoverability, and he knows what he's doing. And the Nightmare Success podcast is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group. It's the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice system. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you this is a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Pacific. For information, go to prisonist.org. That's prisonist.org. Start here. So, Maggie, you're doing all
Yes.
this. You're doing it just because people are telling you, hey, if you go here, this will be easier. And you're not really committed to making anything happen except to get to the next step. And everybody you're around is doing what you're doing, and you're not seeing how it's affecting everybody else. So, how does it happen?
So I think the so again the public defender saying what she said, there was the dare from this gentleman who, I had used as this buffer, who said, "You're not going to do anything." And he was really the only one who was left, who was still kind of allowing me to kind of be as nutty as I was and do all I was doing. And he was acting as though like, it wasn't happening,
Yeah.
which was what I was looking for.
Sure.
And so now here he is, and he has actually made a dare. And it was that dare that actually got me into treatment. Now, I have in the back of my head also what my public defender has said to me. And of course, I have an open, an active case because I always did. I was never free. I was either on my way out of jail, on my way in jail, on probation, on parole. Something was happening with the criminal justice system. And so and so he said that to me that morning. And again, I called up my sister who was working for liberation programs. And I said, I'm ready to go into treatment. I'm ready to go inpatient. She's like, okay, good. Then call them up. I'm like, I'm calling you. She's like, no, call them
You
up.
do it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly what I needed, right? Because I continued to rely on someone else all along. And so I asked him to give me a ride. He gave me a ride down to Liberation. And I went in, and it wasn't just right then that I went into the front door of Liberation. I went out the back door because I told him I need $50 because of the fact I have to pay them for coming in.
Mhm.
But of course, I had public insurance and they were taking insurance, but I needed $50. I went in the front door, I went out the back door, I crossed the fence, I went up to the west side, I copped some drugs, I came back down, I came back through the back door, came back through, I sat for part of a screening that I needed to do, went back to the car, told him I needed to go back to the house to pack up everything that I needed because they had said to me, we have a bed for you and you can come in today. Because
Okay.
my sister had done some work in the back, even though she didn't want me to know it. She had already done the work that needed to be done. And so I told him I had to go back and pack up some things, right? And he said, why don't I just bring them for you? I said, no, I got to go back home. So I go back home, I lock myself in the bathroom and I smoke what I just copped. And I go in there and I finish up with that. And somewhere divine intervention kicked in. And I put a couple of things in a bag. And I got back into the van and he drove me into treatment. And I went inside and I remember my sister came out and she hugged me. And I walked around and they had these steep, 2 flights of steep red stairs. And they opened the door and I remember there was this guy who was standing, he was a counselor standing at the top of the stairs. And he said, welcome to life.
Mm.
And I'm thinking to myself, if I go up these stairs, I'm not going to be able to come back down. And so I stood there and I looked up for a while and I finally got up the stairs and I went in and I remember there was this huge teddy bear sitting in this office that they called the MGR, which was the manager's office. And I remember thinking to myself, I wish I had like a teddy bear or something. I just needed something to hold or to hold me.
Mm-hmm.
But I sat down because at that moment, I didn't want anyone to know how I was feeling because I still needed to have this exterior of this tough guy, right? And the whole process started there. It started there. But I didn't go into treatment, Brent, even those moments right there. The reason why I actually went in was because I knew I was going to end up back in Niantic in the prison, right? And I didn't want to take that long ride from Niantic back to Stanford before I could use drugs again. So there was never a thought that I'm going in here and I'm going to get better and I'm going to stop using drugs. I was trying to shorten the trip for when I left so that I can get a good high. And that was it. And I went in and I stayed for 7 months and I still ended up back in prison.
What was that like after you'd been in 7 months in treatment to go back to prison? Had to be
Very
different
different.
this time.
Very different. It was very different. I can't say that at that point I was like, woo, I'm doing recovery. I'm not gonna but it was different in the sense that, so as usual, I was offered drugs and I was able to turn those down, right?
Mm-hmm. Big
That was
deal.
a first.
Yeah.
That was a first, right? And I was also in lockup 23 hours because I had an escape on me because I had not shown up for parole or probation or any of that. And then there was a girl in there who actually, while I was actually, who was my roommate, and she actually hung herself right in. I woke up to feet dangling by my bed.
Oh my gosh, Maggie. Wait a minute. You were in lockup, and which that's horrible all in itself. 23 hours a day, 1 hour out. You wake up and she's hung herself.
She's hung herself with her sheet.
Oh man.
She was my bunkmate. She was on the top bunk, and all I remember is just the echoing of my screaming, and just around the whole thing. And it was definitely the name of your show. It was a nightmare for sure.
I just can't imagine. When you see something like that, we had something that's so far removed from that, but it still affected me. When I was at Leavenworth, there was an older guy. I say older, I'm 58 now. He was probably in his 60s at the time, but he was very close to getting out. He was very smart. He had a couple of boys, sons that he was from California. Here he was at Leavenworth in Kansas, but he got hassled a lot. And he got into a fight with these guys that were hassling, and they got thrown in to the hole. And I remember we got the word that he'd hung himself, and I think he only had like 4 or 5 months until he got out. And this was somebody that we were walking with. I had just, I had a 5-year sentence, and I just gotten to know some people. He was one of the people that I had gotten to know within the first, 12 weeks. And it's so, like, when somebody dies in prison, it's awful when somebody dies, but to that be their last place that they die just is so, like, I don't even know where. That's
Yeah.
a feeling that nobody should die in prison, because it's the worst place that you can die. And then somebody that takes their life, that just shows you how low they were.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So those two things really, I think, had some impact in the, I what I did know was that I didn't want to come back there.
Yeah.
I still did not know yet how I was gonna, you know, um, whether I was gonna recidivate and how I was gonna do that and what reentry was gonna be like, because all of these services that exist today didn't exist back then.
Mm-hmm.
There was no one, there was not a hang time, there was no one to
Yeah.
meet us, come into the prison and talk and then go back. There was the Bible study and the 12-step meetings were actually held off of campus all the way over, and you went there and you got searched when you went in, you got searched when you came back, but you couldn't really make the connections.
Well,
You were
and
not allowed to make the
Maggie,
calls.
I guess I should ask you, when you got out of the 7 months and went back to prison, how long was that stint for you at that point?
So that was about 9 months.
Okay.
That was about 9 months. Yeah.
So,
And then the last time was actually the final time of being there was after I was violated from treatment because of the fact that I had the escape, and that was actually all of my sentence was modified, and again with the assistance of my public defender, but also the 12-step supports where individuals wrote letters.
yeah.
And what you see, who you see today, 50% of that I had actually become that person through actually getting back to a different place and not having drugs in my system and things of that sort. And so there were people who were willing to stand behind me and support me and just say,
Well,
hopefully she can come out.
I'm curious, Maggie, how or did you start thinking about, through your own recovery, that you wanted to help people in recovery? Like, how did that come about for you?
So so that was really so I'm working, this is now I'm in treatment and I'm working at a hotel, and I'm doing night audits and things of that sort. And so in this job, it was so interesting because now I am 7 months out of treatment, right? And I'm working in this job and I'm going back and forth to court. So I haven't really, I haven't been sentenced to go back in as of yet. And I'm still actually at a crossroads because of the fact that I have access to hotel rooms, and everyone who has been selling drugs or using drugs and things of that sort that's where we ended up, was in hotels and, bagging up and packaging and doing that sort. So now people are coming to this hotel and they're asking me to actually open a door for them to be able to go in. So I'm at this crossroads, and I'm struggling to really do the right thing because this is my job, but I'm really not so sold on like this job as opposed to quick money yet. Like I haven't made that switch yet.
Hmm.
So I'm being offered hundreds of dollars to just open a room for a few hours for someone to go in and, bag up their drugs, as opposed to, the $10 an hour that I'm making, doing the night audit and the whole bit. And I'm at this crossroads. And a lady came into the hotel, and I remember her coming in. She had a baby, and she was registering to come in. It was that early that morning because I was getting off because I did the overnight audits, and I was getting off, and she was talking about how she had seen something in the parking lot, and this was the same guy who had just come in and asked me to open a room. And she was afraid because she thought she saw a gun. She knows she saw a drug exchange, and so she was sharing this with like the hotel assistant, and somewhere in me something said, so you can be the part of that or a part of that.
Mm.
During treatment I had thought to myself, you know what, my counselor was who did one of the trauma groups, was so great with me in kind of working through my own personal trauma and things of that sort. And I was like, I kind of want to do what she's doing, but I think I would rather work with women, or maybe I want to work with kids so that a child, my 5 year old, would have someone so they can have a voice, so that they could start to have something to say, so that they could use their voice, so that the secrets that I had to hold, that they're not left holding those things. So I wasn't sure whether I wanted to work with women or kids, but I knew I wanted to do some of that. My sister is still working at Liberation Programs, right? Calls me up and says, hey, they're going to open a women and children's program. I'm going to send you the press release, right? Sends it over to me in the whole bit. And I read it, and I said, okay, I'm just going to apply. Because I apply because now I feel like I need to get away from here because I'm really not I'm not strong enough to be able to say no to the
Every
fast
time.
money, and
Yeah.
I'm justifying that it's the fast money. It's not that I'm a part of
Right.
this whole process, right?
Hmm.
And so I apply, and I get a call right away, get an interview, go in, and I get hired, right? I get offered the job right on the spot, come back to work, and I'm gonna, write the letter to give notice and the whole bit. And I also received the call that I was pregnant. So I'm like, so then I called back to let them know, listen, I just want to let you know that, I just found out that I'm pregnant. And she was like, you know what? This lady, Lucy, who's my mentor, and she said, pregnancy is not a disability. Do you want the job or not? Got
Great.
the job, and and that was, that I started on June 13th, 1994, and have done like a number of jobs there, and every day the opportunity to, I feel like that, have being there for the kids and the adults,
Yeah.
getting the opportunity to be able to do that,
Yeah.
to me every day just pays it forward for me.
Oh yeah, Maggie, because you had so much that you dealt with as a kid. You walked through all the steps of struggle as a young adult, and to be able to find your purpose of truly being able to talk to people, kids, about opening up because you weren't able to open up. Talk about how hard it is to stop the struggle of the addiction and to move forward. Those things are so impactful that can change people's lives. I just can't imagine. I've got a daughter who, my youngest daughter, I got three daughters, and she's a teacher. And I think when I was going through uh, the whole nightmarish part of everything, she had some teachers that were really helpful to her. And I think that's what drew her to want to be a teacher. And I think, Maggie, what you're doing, giving back, you are paying it forward every day. And um, what a great thing.
Yeah. And there was also, like, while in prison, right? There were, um, so the last couple of times while I was in prison, it was different for me. It was different in the sense that, as opposed to me always looking to find out, let me talk to someone who I may not know, who may have done,
Hmm.
their activities different than me, so I can learn and practice that when I go out. It really had gotten to a place where it was really about the fact of looking at, oh my God, like, all of the pain that I've been through, I've actually been a player in some of this pain.
Right.
So owning some of that, right? And then being able to talk to, so being with some women in there and talking to them about what it was that they were going through. And to your point, Brent, women who, I didn't have a kid at the time,
Hmm.
but those who were in prison. And I remember this woman saying to me, I feel like that I have died since I'm in here. So
Mm.
when you were talking about the gentleman who you were talking about,
Yeah.
he said, my relationship with my kids does not exist. I don't want them coming here because I don't want them seeing me in here.
Right.
I feel like I've died. I have no room to do anything that I'm doing. And she started to go to church and things of that sort. But the prison walls, there's something about the walls
Hmm.
that is really
Yeah.
takes away that whole piece of kind of freedom. And to be in there and to really try to build some community around being able to hear what other women were going through,
Yeah.
which helped me to feel as though it wasn't quite as bad. And looking at my sentence as opposed to others who actually have life sentence,
Yeah.
and what can I do and how can I? And then also staying in touch and trying to, again, these days, being able to have a pen pal, being able to go back in there, being able, so if for anyone who is actually listening, right, from a prison setting, in there, it really starts off with, you deserve better.
You deserve
You
better.
can do better. And as much as we are trapped inside the wall when we're in prison, we still have the freedom of ourself to be able to find a way to really just kind of be okay in that moment and to do something different.
It's a great message. In a typical day, as the chief recovery officer now, what goes on with liberation programs?
So, so first of all, I get to kind of connect with someone every day, and I feel like that the chief recovery officer really offers me the opportunity to really talk recovery in every area of our agency. And I oversee prevention, which is really looking at, how do we actually talk to and educate individuals in the schools, in the community, in the faith-based community, just as impacted, not just as impacted, in our inpatient programs, things of that sort, right?
Hmm.
To really just kind of talk about, I feel like that my story is really my weapon.
Yeah.
And so I use that just to kind of, making sure that I'm using it, because I think that this pearl, if I want to call it that, may be something that someone could use.
Yeah.
Not to pat myself on the back, because every day that I get up, I still need to make the decision not to pick up a drug, even 33 years later.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is still a decision and it's still work,
Hmm.
right? And so I get to be around someone. Last night, I talked to a mom and her mother, and her mother shared, and I felt so bad, right? I was like, oh my God, that's how I was stealing my mother's peace of mind. Because you know what she said to me? She said, every time my daughter gets to this 30-day mark, this is what happens. She finds reasons as to why it
Yeah.
is that.
Sabotages it.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I felt so bad for her. And she said she didn't use these words, but she pretty much said that there are times that she has felt like a prison in her own home
Hmm.
when her daughter is there and she's using and she doesn't know what to do. And at the same time, the mom part of her is loving her and doesn't want to put her on the street.
Right. Yep.
And so the ability to do that, the ability to connect with caregivers, with individuals, with kids, to actually say to a mom that, you know what, when they get to a point where they're starting to, there was one of my spiritual advisors had said to me at one point, she said, listen, she said, this is how you determine how you're doing. She said, if you start to feel pain in your back or in your shoulders, she said, you need to then emotionally look and see whose things are you carrying as opposed to your own, because you're built to carry yours. So physical is the last indicator that something emotional is happening. And so just really being able to kind of frame that based on where they are and be able to say to them, you have a voice, you can use it. Just use it. Just take a risk. Just take a risk. And there was a sheriff in when I was in my last time who actually she would come and get me, and she would take me and she would allow me to call my mom. I'll never forget her. I'll never forget her.
Mm. Wow. You know, I always ask everybody on the program, because everybody's got their own story. What do you think's your biggest takeaway, Maggie, through the life that you've lived?
Ooh, I think I would have to say that everything that I've gone through was really divine order,
Mm.
because there's always someone that is my responsibility to share something with.
That's good. And that's what you're doing. And that's so impactful. And it's a game changer in a lot of situations. And I would love to just have a cloning machine, Maggie, of you, and we could just put you in all these different states, and then you could help all these different people out. Because it's people like you that you're the real deal. They know when you talk to them, like you were talking last night with that mom and daughter. They know you've been there. They know how you've experienced, and you can share those stories back, and they don't feel alone when they know that somebody that's been there is there to help them. And I think that's just that's the secret ingredient. That becomes your special power, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, the Liberation um, organization, Liberation programs, is that people can go to that website, right?
Yes,
Liberation.
liberationprograms.org.
Okay.
They can go to the website. We provide services for individuals we have services for youth through the full continuum of
All
older
the way
adults.
through.
All the way through. We have inpatient programs, we have medication assisted programs, two outpatient programs where we individuals come in for medication assisted treatment. We have intensive outpatient programs. Outpatient programs are two residential programs. One is for males, a 64-bed male, where half of those beds are individuals who are justice impacted and come directly from the prison system. So their court support services division, they come in there. That does not mean that the other half are not justice impacted as well.
Right.
It's just that they are not in the system. They are not in prison at the time, or a probation officer is not referring them. So there's that for the men. And then there's the 10-bed inpatient program for pregnant and parenting women with their children, where they could bring up to 2 children. And that is the program that I was instrumental in actually starting. So when I got the press release, and I've been working here at this particular program the entire time of that. And so we just celebrated 30 years in October of last year
Wow.
of this program. And we have outpatient, we have harm reduction, we have outreach, and we have Ryan White services.
Great. I mean, just a great organization doing great work that's needed.
Yeah.
Maggie, thanks so much. For those out there, I want to give a shout out to Homestead Financial, who lets me use this podcast studio, all these fancy lights and cameras and that. I appreciate it. If anybody's got home mortgage needs out there, Greg Afdia from Homestead Financial is your guy. If you looking for a book out there, I've got one, Nightmare Success. You can get on Barnes and Noble or Amazon. And if you got time, I know it's a hassle, but it helps the show to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Takes a few seconds, but it's great. If you want to know anything about me, what I'm doing, go to brentcassity.com. I spell it wrong. It's with a TY, not a DY. Well, I would love to have been a DY growing up, Maggie, with the Sean and David Cassidy and the
Exactly.
whole deal. As I used to say to my people when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Maggie Young, thank you so much. And thank you so much for what you do. I just hope you just keep it all going.
All righty. Create a great day. And it's such a pleasure. Such a pleasure.
Thank you, Maggie. Nightmare success in and out.